The morning alarm echoed through the metal halls of Corvus Prime Station like a dying animal's cry. Jiho Kim rolled out of his narrow bunk and rubbed his eyes. 6 months at the Galactic Military Academy, and he still wasn't used to the sound. Back on Earth, alarm clocks were gentle beeps or music. Here they used something that sounded like a screaming beast to wake up future soldiers. Another beautiful day in paradise, Minho Park said from the bunk below. His roommate was already putting on his uniform. Minho had been at the academy 2 years longer than Jiho, but they had become close friends quickly. Both were from Seoul, both missed real kimchi, and both were tired of other species looking at them like they were made of glass. Jiho pulled on his gray academy uniform and looked out the small window. Space stretched endlessly in all directions. Thousands of stars twinkled like distant campfires. Sometimes he wondered what his old friends back on Earth were doing. Probably sleeping in comfortable beds and eating food that didn't taste like cardboard. The mess hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. Jiho and Minho found their usual table near the back. Yuna Lee was already there, reading something on her tablet while eating breakfast. She was the only human in their year who consistently scored higher than the alien cadets in combat training. Her parents had been military officers, and it showed. "Morning, Yuna," Jiho said, sitting down with his tray of something that might have been eggs. "Did you hear?" she asked without looking up. "Commander Velak is announcing something big today. The third-year students are talking about it." Minho groaned. "I hate it when Velak has announcements. Last time we had to do survival. Training in the asteroid field for a week. Commander Velak was a Threnody, which meant he looked like a 7-foot-tall lizard wearing a military uniform. His species had been warriors for thousands of years. They had conquered 3 star systems before humans even invented the wheel. Velak made it clear that he thought humans were too soft for real military work. He seemed to take personal pleasure in proving this point whenever possible. At the next table, Brix was bragging about something to his friends. Brix was from a species called crystallines. His skin looked like living diamond, and he was stronger than any human. He enjoyed reminding everyone of this fact. "My people have been soldiers since before yours discovered fire," he was saying to a group of younger cadets. Nearby, Nala sat alone as usual. She was from the Kresh species, who looked like large cats that walked on 2 legs. Her people were natural hunters with incredible speed and sharp claws. She rarely spoke to anyone, but when she did fight in training, it was like watching liquid lightning. "Attention, cadets." Commander Velak's voice boomed through the mess hall speakers. "Report to Assembly Hall 7 in 10 minutes. Anyone who is late will enjoy extra physical training this evening." The assembly hall was a massive room with seats for all 800 cadets at the academy. Jiho found himself between Minho and a nervous-looking Zentari, whose tentacles kept twitching. The lights dimmed as Commander Velak walked onto the stage. "Cadets," Velak began, his yellow eyes scanning the crowd. "For 300 years, this academy has maintained a sacred tradition, a final test that separates the worthy from the weak, the brave from the cowardly, the soldiers from the civilians." Jiho felt his stomach tighten. He had heard rumors about the final year test, but no one would say exactly what it involved. Students who had taken it either transferred to other programs or became strangely quiet about their experience. "The fear trial," Velak continued. "Every species in this galaxy knows fear. Fear of death, fear of pain, fear of failure. Fear makes soldiers hesitate. It makes them weak. The fear trial will show you your deepest terror and force you to face it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some cadets looked excited. Others, like Jiho, felt their breakfast trying to escape back up their throats. "The trial takes place in the abandoned lower decks of this station," Velak said. "You will be sealed in individual chambers for 6 hours. Our bioneural technology will scan your mind and create the thing you fear most. Some of you will break. Some will transfer to easier programs, and some will emerge as true warriors." Brix was nodding eagerly. His crystalline features seemed to gleam with anticipation. "Finally, a real challenge," he whispered to his friends. The human cadets, Velak's eyes found Jiho's section of the room, may find this particularly difficult. Your species has lived comfortable lives on your single world. You have not faced the true darkness that exists in the galaxy. I expect many of you will choose to return home after this experience." Jiho felt his face burn with embarrassment and anger. It was true that Earth was peaceful compared to some worlds, but humans had survived ice ages, world wars, and natural disasters. They weren't as soft as Velak thought. "The trial begins in 3 days," Velak announced. "Use that time to prepare yourselves. Meditate on your fears. Accept them. Only by knowing your terror can you hope to overcome it." Dismissed. As the cadets filed out of the assembly hall, Jiho heard excited chatter in a dozen languages. Some students were already planning strategies. Others looked pale and sick. "What do you think your worst fear is?" Minho asked as they walked back to their quarters. Jiho thought about it. Heights? No, he had done zero-gravity training. Spiders? That seemed too simple. Death? Everyone feared death, but that felt too obvious for the bio-neural system to create. "I don't know," he admitted. "What about you?" "Failure," Minho said immediately. "Letting down my family, coming all this way just to prove that humans really are too weak for the galaxy." Yuna had been quiet during the walk, but now she spoke up. "The thing is, we don't know what the system will find in our minds. It's not about what we think we fear. It's about what we actually fear deep down where we don't usually look." That night, Jiho lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Through the small window, the stars looked different somehow. Less like friendly campfires and more like distant, cold eyes watching him. In 3 days, he would face something terrible. In the dark lower decks of the station, he wondered if Commander Velak was right. Maybe humans were too soft for this. Maybe he should just transfer to engineering school or civilian transport training. But then he thought about Earth, and his family, and all the humans who would follow him to the stars. Someone had to prove they belonged here. Someone had to show the galaxy that humans were more than they seemed, even if that someone was just a quiet kid from Seoul who wasn't sure what he was afraid of. The lower decks of Corvus Prime Station had been abandoned for 50 years. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down empty corridors that once housed thousands of workers. The air smelled of old metal, and something else Jiho couldn't identify. Something that made his skin crawl. Commander Velak led the group of final-year cadets through the maze of passages. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the darkness. Jiho stayed close to Minho and Yuna, but he could feel the distance growing between them. Soon they would be separated, each facing their worst nightmare alone. "The chambers are spread throughout this section," Velak explained as they walked. "Each one is equipped with bio-neural projectors, life support, and emergency systems. The door will seal for exactly 6 hours. The trial ends when the time expires, or when your vital signs indicate complete psychological breakdown." "What happens if we break down?" asked a Zentari cadet whose name Jiho had never learned. Velak's lizard-like face showed what might have been a smile. "Medical attention and a transfer to civilian programs. The military has no use for broken minds." They passed viewing windows that looked into empty rooms. Some contained strange equipment that hummed with energy. Others were completely dark. Jiho tried not to think about what would be created in those spaces when the trial began. "The bio-neural system," Velak continued, "reads the deepest parts of your mind. It finds fears you may not even know you have. It makes them real using advanced holography, force fields, and neural stimulation. To your brain, the experience will be completely genuine." Brix laughed. "My people have faced real monsters for centuries. What can a machine create that's worse than the crystal predators of my homeworld?" "We will see," Velak replied. The first chambers were for non-human cadets. Jiho watched through observation windows as the trial began. The bio-neural scanners descended from the ceiling, surrounding each cadet's head with a crown of blue light. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the nightmares began. In the first chamber, Brix faced creatures that looked like himself but twisted and wrong. They moved like liquid crystal, reaching for him with arms that could stretch impossible distances. His diamond-hard skin, usually his greatest protection, began to crack under their touch. Jiho could hear his screams through the speakers. In another room, Nala fought a pack of hunters that moved faster than even her enhanced reflexes. They looked like shadows with teeth, always just out of reach until they weren't. Her natural predator instincts meant nothing against things that hunted predators. A Zentari cadet faced drowning in air, his breathing tentacles useless as phantom water filled his chamber. A Rigelian fought gravity that pulled him in all directions, at once his bones creaking under impossible pressure. Fascinating, Valak said, watching the screens. See how each fear is perfectly designed for the individual. The system knows exactly what will break them. Minho was next. Through the viewing window, Jiho watched his friend sit in the scanning chair. The blue light surrounded his head, and the nightmare began. A figure materialized in the chamber. It looked like Minho's father, but wrong. Disappointed, angry. The phantom began to speak in Korean, words that made Minho curl into a ball on the floor. Jiho couldn't understand everything, but he caught enough. Words about failure, about shame, about coming so far just to prove that humans didn't belong among the stars. Psychological fears are often more effective than physical ones, Velek observed. Your friend will break within the hour. Jiho wanted to argue, but Minho was already sobbing on the floor as more phantom figures appeared. His mother, his teachers, his childhood friends all looking at him with expressions of crushing disappointment. Yuna went next. Her nightmare was different. She faced herself, but a version that had failed everyone she cared about. Phantom versions of dead comrades blamed her for their deaths. Each accusation hit her like a physical blow. Her perfect military posture crumbled as she tried to defend herself against attacks that came from inside her own mind. Then it was Jiho's turn. The chamber was small and cold. The bio-neural scanner descended like a metal spider, its sensors focusing on his head. Jiho tried to stay calm, but his heart was racing. What would the machine find in his mind? What was he really afraid of? The scanning began. Blue light filled his vision as the system dove deep into his thoughts. Jiho felt something cold and invasive touching parts of his mind that had never been touched before. The machine searched through memories, instincts, and fears he had never acknowledged. But something went wrong. The scanner sparked and made a sound like breaking glass. The blue light turned purple, then black. Through the speakers, Jiho could hear the technicians shouting in confusion. What's happening? Velek demanded. The system is accessing deeper levels than programmed, a technician replied. It's reading beyond individual psychology, into species memory, into genetic memory, into things that existed before consciousness. The darkness in the chamber began to move. What emerged was not from human mythology or Jiho's personal fears. It was something older and hungrier. It had too many angles that hurt to look at. Its teeth existed in dimensions that made geometry cry. Eyes opened in places where eyes should not be, seeing things that should not be seen. The creature was wrong, in a way that went beyond words. It was fear given form, hunger given purpose, darkness given teeth. It was the thing that lived in the spaces between thoughts, the nightmare that existed before minds learned how to have nightmares. Even through the observation window, Jiho could see the technicians backing away from their screens. Commander Velek's reptilian face had gone pale. This wasn't what the system was supposed to create. This wasn't something from Earth's fears. This was something from the fears that existed before Earth. The creature circled the chamber, reality, bending around it like heat waves. Where it moved, the walls seemed to breathe. The air tasted of copper and despair. It was magnificent and terrible and completely impossible, and it was looking directly at Jiho. Through the speakers, the technicians were panicking. The containment fields are fluctuating. This entity is beyond our control parameters. It's feeding on fear itself and growing stronger. Abort the trial, Velak ordered. The systems aren't responding. It's like the creature is interfering with the technology. In the chamber, the impossible thing approached Jiho. Its form shifted between states of matter, existing in too many dimensions at once. Each step it took made the lights flicker and the metal walls groan. This was it, Jiho thought. This was how he died. Not in glorious battle or heroic sacrifice, but alone in a dark room, consumed by a nightmare that shouldn't exist. The creature reached out with something that might have been an arm, and Jiho did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He sat down cross-legged on the floor and closed his eyes. The observation room fell silent. Through the viewing window, everyone watched Jiho sit perfectly still as the nightmare creature loomed over him. The thing that should not exist paused, its impossible form rippling like water disturbed by a dropped stone. "What is he doing?" Velak whispered. The technician monitoring Jiho's vital signs stared at his screen in confusion. His heart rate is decreasing. Fear response is dropping. This should be impossible. In other chambers, cadets were screaming, fighting, or curled up in terror. Brix was hammering his diamond fists against crystalline horrors that laughed at his strength. Nala was running in circles trying to escape shadow hunters that matched her every move. Minho was still sobbing as phantom disappointments crushed his spirit. But in Jiho's chamber, something unprecedented was happening. The creature circled him slowly, its form shifting between states that hurt to perceive. It reached out with appendages that existed in too many dimensions, stopping just short of touching the quiet human. Through the speakers, they could hear something impossible. The creature was making sounds. Not roars or screams, but something, almost like confused whimpers. Jiho opened his eyes and looked directly at the entity. Anyone watching expected him to scream or run or collapse. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the impossible thing with the same expression he might use to examine an interesting puzzle. "You're not really a monster, are you?" he said quietly. The creature's form rippled. Eyes that existed in wrong dimensions blinked in what might have been surprise. "The system pulled you from somewhere you didn't want to leave," Jiho continued, his voice calm and steady. "You're lost, scared, just like the rest of us." In the observation room, Velak stepped closer to the window. He's talking to it. He's actually talking to a fear construct that should be driving him insane. "Sir," the technician said, "the entity's energy patterns are changing. It's becoming less aggressive." Jiho slowly extended his hand toward the creature. Not to strike or defend, but in the universal gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said. "I know what it's like to be far from home. To be in a place where everything is strange and scary." The creature's chaotic form began to settle. The reality-bending effects around it faded slightly. It was still impossible to look at directly, still wrong in fundamental ways, but somehow less threatening. "You don't have to be afraid," Jiho said. "Neither do I." He began to hum. The melody was simple, something his grandmother had sung to him when he was small and couldn't sleep. A Korean lullaby about a rabbit on the moon, making rice cakes for children who had bad dreams. The effect on the creature was immediate and startling. Its form stopped shifting so violently. The angles that hurt to perceive became slightly less painful. The eyes that saw impossible things began to close one by one. "This is unprecedented," breathed the technician. "The entity's fear energy output is dropping to almost zero, but that should cause it to dissipate. It's not supposed to exist without terror to feed on." Instead of disappearing, the creature was changing. It was still impossible, still wrong in ways that made reality uncomfortable. But now it seemed more like a very large, very lost pet than a nightmare from the void between thoughts. Jiho continued humming his grandmother's lullaby. The creature settled down beside him, its massive form curling up like a cat seeking warmth. Appendages that had reached through dimensions now tucked themselves closer to its body. Eyes that had seen horrors beyond description drifted closed. Within minutes, both the human cadet and the impossible entity appeared to be napping. "Sir," the technician said, his voice cracking slightly. "I think they're both asleep." Velak stared through the window at the scene. In all his centuries of military service, across dozens of worlds and hundreds of species, he had never seen anything like this. The creature that had made his technicians flee their consoles was now dozing peacefully beside a human who should have been driven mad by its presence. "How is this possible?" he asked. The chief technician, a Threnody scientist, named Dr. Kex, was running diagnostics on all his equipment. "The bio-neural system is functioning normally, sir. The entity is still there, still active, but its behavioral patterns have completely changed. It's as if..." "As if what?" "As if it's been domesticated, sir." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Domesticated. The concept was familiar to most species, but not like this. Humans were known for their strange ability to befriend other Earth animals. They had turned wolves into dogs, wild horses into partners, even convinced some birds to live in their homes. But this was different. This was a creature from the spaces, between nightmares, an entity that existed on fear itself. In the other chambers, the trials continued. Brix was finally overwhelmed by his crystalline nightmares, curling into a defensive ball as they picked at his fractures. Nala had stopped, running and was snarling at the shadow hunters, but her defiance was weakening. Minho's sobbing had become a low, constant whimper as the phantoms of disappointment surrounded him. But in Jiho's chamber, peace reigned. The impossible creature had somehow found a way to exist without feeding on terror. Instead, it seemed to be drawing sustenance from something else entirely, something that came from the quiet human beside it. "Should we abort the trial?" Dr. Kex asked. Velak studied the scene for a long moment. His military training told him to end the experiment, immediately. This was beyond all parameters, beyond all understanding. But something else, something deeper, kept him watching. "No," he said finally. "Let it continue. I want to see what happens next." As if responding to his words, Jiho stirred slightly in his sleep. The creature's form rippled, several eyes opening to check on its new companion. When the human settled back into peaceful rest, the entity's eyes closed again. Through the speakers, they could still hear the sounds from other chambers. Screaming, crying, the clash of desperate combat against impossible foes. But from Jiho's room came only the soft sound of synchronized breathing. Human and nightmare, sleeping side by side in perfect trust. "Sir," Dr. Kex said quietly, "I think we may need to reconsider our understanding of human psychological responses." Velak nodded slowly. In 300 years of fear trials, they had seen every possible reaction: fight, flight, breakdown, rage, despair. They had cataloged the responses of dozens of species to their deepest terrors. But they had never seen this. They had never seen someone turn a nightmare into a friend. As the trial entered its third hour, Jiho continued to sleep peacefully beside the creature that should have destroyed him. And somewhere in the observation room, Commander Velak began to wonder if perhaps humans were not too soft for the galaxy. Perhaps they were something else entirely. The emergency alarm started blaring 4 hours into the trial. In the other chambers, cadets were reaching their breaking points. Brix had stopped fighting his crystalline nightmares and was unconsciously rocking back and forth. Nyla was backed into a corner, her predator instincts completely overwhelmed. Minho had gone silent, staring at nothing while phantom voices whispered his failures. But in Jiho's chamber, both human and impossible creature woke calmly at the sound of the alarms. The entity stretched in ways that made geometry uncomfortable, while Jiho rubbed his eyes like someone waking from a pleasant afternoon nap. "We need to abort," Dr. Kex said urgently. "The other cadets are approaching psychological collapse." "What about the human?" Velak asked, still staring through the observation window. "His vital signs are completely normal. Better than normal, actually. His stress hormones are at resting levels. His brain activity suggests he's more relaxed than when he entered the chamber." Jiho stood and walked to the viewing window. Through the reinforced glass, he could see the faces of the observation team. They looked terrified, confused, and fascinated all at the same time. The creature followed him, moving with strange grace despite its impossible form. "Commander Velak," Jiho said through the intercom, his voice clear and steady. "I think we need to talk." The creature beside him made a sound that might have been agreement. Several of its dimensional eyes focused on the Threnody commander, with what seemed like polite interest. The emergency systems are ready to flood the chamber with neural suppressors, Dr. Kex whispered. We can force the entity to dissipate. No, Jiho said, apparently hearing them. That would hurt him, and he's not causing any harm. Him. Jiho was referring to the nightmare entity as him, like it was a person. Velak activated the intercom. Cadet Kim, explain what happened in there. Jiho looked back at his companion, who had settled beside him like a loyal pet. You created him from our fears, but you didn't understand what you were making. He's not just a fear construct, he's real. He has thoughts, feelings. He was lost and scared, pulled from wherever he belonged into a place that didn't make sense. That's impossible, Dr. Kex protested. It's a bio-neural projection, a sophisticated hologram designed to trigger fear responses. Is he? Jiho asked, reaching out to gently touch what might have been the creature's head. Look at him. Really look. He's not just responding to programming. He's thinking. He's making choices. The entity made that soft whimpering sound again, leaning into Jiho's touch. Despite its impossible form, the gesture was unmistakably affectionate. You made him from the deep places in human memory, Jiho continued. The old fears, the ones we carried from before we had words. But you forgot something important about humans. We don't just fear the unknown. We also have the ability to make the unknown into the known, to turn strangers into friends. Velak found himself stepping closer to the window. Explain. Look at Earth's history, Jiho said. We lived alongside creatures that could kill us easily. Wolves, bears, big cats. But instead of just fighting them or running away, we found ways to coexist. We domesticated wolves into dogs. We partnered with horses. We convinced cats to live in our homes and convinced ourselves we were doing them a favor. The creature made what sounded like a chuckle, causing several technicians to jump backward. Other species achieved dominance through strength, or speed, or intelligence, Jiho went on. Humans do something different. We make allies, we find common ground. We turn predators into protectors and enemies into family. That works with earthly animals, Velak said. This is something beyond natural order. Is it? Jiho asked. He was alone and scared, just like any lost animal. He needed friendship, not fighting. So I gave him what he needed. Through the speakers, they could hear the sounds of other cadets being removed from their chambers. Medical teams were carrying out Bricks, whose diamond-hard skin was cracked from psychological stress. Nala was sedated and unconscious. Minho was conscious but unresponsive, staring at nothing with empty eyes. The other trials failed because you assumed fear could only be overcome through combat or endurance, Jiho said. But humans have a third option. We make friends with what scares us. Dr. Kex was frantically reading his instruments. Sir, the entity's energy signature is completely different now. It's not feeding on fear anymore. It's drawing power from something else. Something I don't have sensors for. What? Velak demanded. I think, Dr. Kex said slowly. It's feeding on companionship, on friendship, on the bond it's formed with the human. The creature moved closer to Jiho, wrapping what might have been an arm around his shoulders. The gesture was protective, gentle. It looked at the observation team with multiple eyes, and somehow they could all sense its intelligence, its awareness. He has a name, Jiho said suddenly. I'm going to call him Gyrimja. It means shadow in Korean. Gyrimja made a pleased sound and nuzzled against Jiho's head with an appendage that phased partially out of reality. This is unprecedented, Velak said quietly. In 300 years of trials, no one has ever made a friend instead of facing a fear, Jiho asked. Maybe that's because no one tried. Maybe everyone was so focused on being strong that they forgot being kind could be stronger. Alarms continued to sound as medical teams dealt with the psychological casualties from other chambers. But in Jiho's room, there was peace. Human and impossible entities sat together like old companions, comfortable in each other's presence. What happens now? Velak asked. Now you have a choice. Jiho said. You can try to destroy him, which would be cruel and wrong. Or you can accept that humans might have something to teach the galaxy about dealing with the unknown. Gurimja looked at Velak with several eyes, tilting his impossible head in a gesture that was remarkably like a curious dog. Despite his otherworldly appearance, the intelligence and gentleness in those eyes was unmistakable. He's not a monster, Jiho said softly. He never was. He's just different. And being different doesn't have to mean being dangerous. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Velak found himself completely uncertain about what to do next. The human cadet had not only survived the fear trial, he had turned it into something entirely new, something that challenged everything the Academy thought it knew about courage, strength, and the proper way to face the unknown. Outside in the corridors, word was already spreading about the impossible scene in Chamber 7. Other species, cadets were asking questions, demanding answers. How had the weak human succeeded where stronger beings had failed? And in the observation room, Velak stared at the peaceful pair and began to wonder if perhaps the galaxy had underestimated humanity in ways they were only beginning to understand. 3 months later, the corridors of Corvus Prime Station had changed. Cadets no longer stared in fear when Gurimja drifted past, his impossible form moving through dimensions that still made geometry uncomfortable. Instead, they nodded respectfully, and some even waved. The entity had become as much a part of Academy life as the morning alarms and terrible food. Jiho sat in the common room, working on his final thesis while Gurimja dozed nearby. The creature had learned to make himself slightly less visible when other students were around, though he never fully hid. He seemed to enjoy the company of the Academy's inhabitants, even if most of them still couldn't look at him directly for very long. Still can't believe this is normal now, Minho said, settling into a chair across from Jiho. His friend had recovered from his fear trial experience, though it had taken weeks of counseling. Now he served as one of the Academy's peer counselors, helping other cadets who struggled with their own trials. Yuna joined them, carrying 3 cups of something that resembled coffee, but tasted like motor oil. She had also completed her fear trial eventually, facing her inner demons with the same determination she brought to everything else. Normal is relative, she said. But I admit, having a pet eldritch horror does make study group interesting. Gurimja made a pleased sound at being called a pet, though several eyes opened to give Yuna a look that was probably amused rather than annoyed. He had learned to understand human humor, even if his responses sometimes made reality hiccup. The fear trial had been permanently changed after Jiho's experience. Now, instead of 6 hours of pure terror, cadets spent 3 hours facing their fears and 3 hours learning to understand them. The success rate had improved dramatically. More importantly, the number of cadets requiring psychological treatment had dropped to nearly 0. Cadet Kim, Commander Velak's voice came from the doorway. The Threnody commander approached their table, his movements careful and respectful. His attitude toward humans had shifted considerably since the incident. You have visitors. Behind Velak came a group of beings Jiho had never seen before. They wore uniforms from different academies across the galaxy, their insignia marking them as high-ranking instructors and administrators. A Rigelian, 2 Zentari, something that looked like a walking tree, and others whose species Jiho couldn't identify. These are representatives from military academies throughout the galaxy, Velak explained. They've come to discuss the changes we've implemented here. The Rigelian stepped forward, his forearms gesturing respectfully. Cadet Kim, I am Commander Zix from the Rigel Defense Academy. We've heard remarkable reports about your unique approach to the fear trial. Gurimja stirred, several eyes opening to examine the newcomers. His form rippled with what Jiho had learned to recognize as curiosity rather than aggression. The visitors stepped back instinctively, but held their ground. We've had similar entities appear at our academy, the tree-like being said, its voice like wind through leaves, nightmare constructs that exceeded their programming parameters. But none of our cadets achieved what you did. They requested transfers or suffered complete breakdowns. "What did you do differently?" asked one of the Zentari. Jiho looked at his friends, then at Garimja, who had moved closer to offer silent support. "I stopped thinking of him as something to fight or overcome. He was scared and alone, just like I was. So instead of trying to defeat him, I tried to understand him. But the psychological programming should have prevented that response," the Rigelian said. "Fear constructs are designed to trigger fight or flight reactions. Maybe for other species," Yuna said. "But humans are different. We have a third option that most beings don't consider." "Which is?" the tree being asked. "Make friends," Minho answered. "It's what we do. Humans don't just adapt to our environment. We make our environment adapt to us, and we do it by turning strangers into allies." Commander Velak moved to a wall display that showed statistics from academies across the galaxy. Since implementing the new trial format based on Cadet Kim's approach, our success rates have improved by 40%. More importantly, our graduates show enhanced problem-solving abilities and improved cooperation with unknown species. The visitors studied the data with obvious interest. Similar entities had appeared at their academies too, but their cadets had either fled or been overwhelmed. Only at Corvus Prime had anyone found a way to coexist with them. "We've received requests from over 50 academies for human exchange students," Velak continued. "Not as cadets, but as instructors, specialists in what we're calling xenological integration." Garimja made a soft sound that might have been pride. He had learned to take satisfaction in Jiho's success, understanding somehow that his friend's achievements reflected well on both of them. "There's something else," the Rigelian said quietly. "We've been monitoring deep space communications. Word has spread about humanity's unique abilities. Species that previously ignored Earth are now requesting diplomatic contact. They want to learn how humans turn enemies into allies." Jiho felt a strange mixture of pride and responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We're not special," he said. We try to see the person behind the scary appearance. Everyone wants to be understood, to belong somewhere. Even creatures, from the spaces between nightmares." As if to prove his point, Garimja gently nuzzled Jiho's shoulder, earning startled gasps from several visitors. The gesture was so clearly affectionate that even the most skeptical observers couldn't deny the genuine bond between human and entity. "What are your plans after graduation?" the tree being asked. "I've been offered a position as a xenological liaison officer," Jiho said. "My job will be to help make first contact with unknown species, especially ones that other races find too dangerous or strange to approach." "And your companion?" Garimja made what sounded like an eager chirp. Despite lacking conventional vocal cords, he had learned to express enthusiasm quite clearly. "He comes with me," Jiho said firmly. "We're partners now. Where I go, he goes." The visitors spent the rest of the day observing classes and interviewing students. They watched Garimja help with advanced physics by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They saw him comfort homesick cadets with a gentleness that defied his impossible appearance. They witnessed firsthand how his presence had changed the entire atmosphere of the academy. As the day ended, Commander Velak found himself standing with Jiho and Garimja on the observation deck, watching ships come and go from the station. "You've changed everything," Velak said quietly. "Not just here, but across the galaxy. Species that have been enemies for centuries are requesting human mediators. Trade disputes that seemed unsolvable are being resolved. All because you chose friendship over fear." Jiho watched a transport ship dock with passengers from a dozen different worlds. "My grandmother always said that the best way to make the world less scary is to fill it with friends." Garimja made a contented sound, wrapping a dimensional appendage around both Jiho and Velak in what was unmistakably a group hug. The Threnody commander, who had once thought humans were too soft for military service, found himself smiling. "What does the future hold for humanity?" Velak asked. Jiho looked out at the stars, thinking about all the unknown species waiting in the darkness between worlds. Some would be dangerous. Some would be strange beyond imagination. Some would be hostile, or afraid, or completely alien to human understanding. "We'll make friends," he said simply. "It's what we do." And beside him, an impossible creature from the spaces between nightmares purred with contentment, having found his place in the universe through the simple act of being understood. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and terrors yet to be discovered. But it was also full of potential friends if you knew how to look for them. Humanity had found their role among the stars. They were the builders of bridges, the makers of peace, the species that could look at the unknown and see not an enemy to be defeated, but a friend waiting to be met. It was, Jiho thought as ships from dozens of worlds docked peacefully together, a pretty good job to have.